Hello boys and girls, this video will be about factoring quadratic trinomials when a is not equal to 1, and this is part 2 of the first factoring quadratic trinomials video I made. Here we'll discuss how to do the AC method. Here's number 1, and we have 2x squared plus 4x minus 48. We can tell it's a trinomial because it has 3 terms, and we can tell it's quadratic because the exponent, the highest exponent here is 2. So those are some important things to notice. Now also notice that our a this time is not 1. The coefficient of the x squared this time is 2. So the way we factor these kinds of trinomials is a little bit different. The first thing you always want to do is see if there is a common factor between all 3 terms. Basically, we're looking for the greatest common factor of 2, 4, and negative 48. And if you notice, all of these numbers are even, meaning that each of them is divisible by 2, so the greatest common factor here is 2. Our first step will be to divide every number by 2, or to factor out the GCF, or to pull out a 2 from each number. Many ways we can say the same thing. This is what that looks like. We'll bring the 2 to the front, and then we ask ourselves 2 times what is 2x squared? Well, it would just be x squared. Then we ask ourselves 2 times what is 4x? The answer is 2x. And finally, we ask ourselves 2 times what is negative 48? And there the answer is negative 24, which leaves us with an expression that looks like this. If you notice, on the inside of the parentheses, we still have a quadratic trinomial, and now our a is 1. So we can resort to the way that we learned how to factor when a equals 1. Remember, what we do here is consider the factors of c, in this case c being 24, and for this part we ignore the sign. We list the factors of 24 in order, so that's 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 also goes into 24, that's 3 times 8, 4 goes into 24, that's 4 times 6, we check the number 5, 5 does not go into 24, and finally we have 6, but 6 is already on our list, so we know we got all the factors down. Next thing is that you want to find the pair of factors that add up to b. And remember here, the word add is a very loose word. Really, we want to check if any of these pairs can add up to 2 or subtract and get 2. If we add 24 and 1, we get 25. If we subtract them, we get 23. Neither of those are 2, so that can't be our answer. Then we check 2 and 12. If we add them, we get 14. If we subtract them, we get 10. Neither of those are 2, so we keep checking. Here, if we add 3 and 8, we get 11. Or if we subtract them, we get 5. Nope. And finally, hopefully this one works. If we add 6 and 4, we get 10. If we subtract them, we get 2, and there's the one that we want. Remember, after finding the pairs that you want, in this case 4 and 6, we need to figure out what signs we can put on 4 and 6 so that when we combine them, we get 2. So we check. 6 plus 4 cannot be, that's 10. 6 minus 4, that's 2. So these are the signs that we want, a positive 6 and a negative 4. Now that we found the factors that we want, we have to take this expression and write it in factored form. Remember to keep the 2 that's on the outside, so we write down a 2, and then we open up our parentheses to factor out x squared plus 2x minus 24. Once again, we already found our factors, positive 6 and negative 4, so we can write down x in both parentheses. One will have a plus 6, the other one will have a negative 4, and here is our answer in factored form. Remember, it's always a good idea to check your work, and in this case we can check whether we factored correctly by foiling. So we have x times x, which is x squared, x times negative 4, which is negative 4x, 6 times x, that's a positive 6x, and 6 times negative 4, which is negative 24. But remember, all of this is being multiplied by 2, so I'm going to bring that 2 down. And if we look inside the parentheses, here we have like terms, negative 4x plus 6x. So bring down the 2 from the outside, open up your parentheses, we have x squared, negative 4 plus 6, that's positive 2x, minus 24. And final step is to distribute the 2 in the front. So 2 times x squared, that's 2x squared. 2 times 2x, that's positive 4x. And 2 times negative 24, that's negative 48. Now we want to compare this answer to our original question, which was this up here, and they do match. meaning we factored correctly. So this is our final answer. Let's try another question. Here's number 2. Once again, we can see that it's a quadratic trinomial. And the first thing we'll do is check to see if there's any common factors. Here the numbers we're comparing are 2, -14, and +24. And notice that all of them are even again. So all of them are divisible by 2. The greatest common factor of 2, -14, 24 is 2. So we can divide everybody by 2. We'll write our 2 out here in the front, open up parentheses, and then we ask ourselves, well, 2x squared divided by 2, that's just x squared. Then -14x divided by 2, that gives you -7x. And finally, 24 divided by 2, that gives you 12. If we look inside our parentheses, we still have a quadratic trinomial, and notice that our a is 1. So we can factor the way we already know how. We begin by listing the factors of c. In this case, our c is 12. The factors of 12 are 1 and 12, 2 and 6, 3 and 4. The next number we will check is 4, but notice 4 is already on the list, so that lets us know that we're done listing all the factors of 12. Now we check through our pairs of factors, and we're looking for a pair that can combine to give us -7. For the time being, we will ignore the fact that the 7 has to be negative, and we'll just start checking addition and subtraction on each of these pairs. 1 plus 12 gives you 13. When you subtract them, you get 11. 2 and 6. When we add them, we get 8. When we subtract them, we get 4. 3 and 4. When we add them, we get 7, and hey, that's what we want. So we know that the factors we need to use involve 3 and 4. Now we have to figure out the signs. If we add 3 plus 4, that gives you 7, which is not the same as a -7. Remember, the goal, what we want, is a -7. If we subtract 3 minus 4, we get -1. If we make the 3 negative and add 4, we get a +1. If we make both numbers negative, -3 minus 4, that's our -7. That's the one we want. So our factors are -3 and -4. What we'll do next is rewrite this expression into its factored form. Notice we just figured out the factors for the trinomial that's inside the parentheses. Remember to keep the 2 on the outside, that's still a factor, and then we can open up our pair of parentheses like this, put our x's inside, and then use the factors that we just figured out. Again, they were -3 and -4. So x minus 3 in one parentheses, x minus 4 in one parentheses. I would like you guys to notice that another way of writing your answer would be like this: 2 times x minus 4 times x minus 3. Both of these answers are equivalent, so either one is fine. And you should be able to recognize either one of them in a multiple choice question. Now let's get a little funky. Here's number 3, which is 6x squared plus 14x plus 4. First thing you want to do is check to see if you have a greatest common factor between all 3 terms. In this case, once again, the 3 terms are even, and their greatest common factor is 2. So we pull a 2 out to the front, and then we see what we have left. We ask ourselves 2 times what will give us 6x squared. That would be 3x squared. Then we ask ourselves 2 times what will give us 14x. Well, 2 times 7 is 14, and we also need that x there, so we'll write down 7x. Last term, we ask ourselves 2 times what is 4, and the answer there is 2, so we write down a plus 2. Notice that we don't need an x for this term. And now, if you notice, we have a trinomial inside the parentheses, but this time a is not equal to 1. And here's where we bring in the AC method. The first step is to factor out the greatest common factor, if you can. Second step is to multiply a times c. Third step, list the factors of a times c. Fourth step, look for a pair of factors that add up to b. And here we have that add up to in parentheses because remember, we can combine the numbers with either addition or subtraction. Number 5 says rewrite the trinomial into having 4 terms. 6 is factored by grouping. Whoa, I wonder what that means. And 7 is to write in factored form. Okay, so some parts of the AC method should feel very familiar, and some parts will be a little bit newer. Let's dive in. First step is to pull out the greatest common factor, which we already did. Second step is to multiply a times c. This is our a, this is our c. So a times c would be 3 times 2 in this case, which is 6. Second step is to list the factors of a times c. So now we're listing the factors of 6. Notice how the procedure is kind of similar to what we did before, except that instead of considering the factors of just c, we first have to multiply a times c. The factors of 6 are 1 and 6, also 2 and 3, and those are it. Now, fourth step says look for a pair of factors that add up to b. So our goal here is the middle term, which is 7, and we check through our pairs of factors to see if we can add them or subtract them to get 7. Our first pair is 1 and 6, and if we add them, we get 7, and that's exactly what we want. Now, the fifth step says rewrite the trinomial into having 4 terms. Here's where things get a little bit different. And before we do that step, let's figure out what the signs of 1 and 6 should be so that we get 7. This one's pretty easy because if you have a positive 1 and a positive 6, that gives you 7. So these are the factors that we're working with right now, positive 1 and positive 6. So I'm going to take this trinomial and write it as having 4 terms. We'll keep the 2 on the outside, open up your parentheses, and we bring down the 3x squared. But instead of writing plus 7x in the middle, we'll write 7 as the sum of 1 and 6. So we'll write plus 1x plus 6x, and then we bring down the last term, which is a 2. I want to pause right here and say 2 things. The first thing is typically we do not write the 1, but I'm writing it right now just so that it's a little bit more in your face. Second thing I want to point out is that if we were to combine these factors, we get 7x. So literally all we're doing is rewriting our trinomial in a different way, but we have not changed the values themselves. The sixth step in our step-by-step says factor by grouping, and that's a new term altogether. Factoring by grouping works when you have 4 terms, like in this case. And when you factor by grouping, what you do is you draw a little wall right in the middle. So you split up your 4 terms into 2 on the left, 2 on the right. And then you're looking for the greatest common factor of each of those pairs. And then you're looking for the greatest common factor of each of those binomials. So we're looking for the greatest common factor of 3x squared plus 1x. And we're looking for the greatest common factor of 6x plus 2. We'll keep the 2 on the outside, and here I'm going to open up a bracket because we'll also be using parentheses when we factor the inside. Okay, so for 3x squared plus 1x, the greatest common factor between these 2 terms is just x. We can open up our parentheses, and then we ask ourselves, x times what is 3x squared? Well, that'd be 3x. Then we ask ourselves, x times what is 1x? Now would just be a plus 1. So we're done factoring the left half of our polynomial. Now we'll factor the right half of our polynomial. We want to find the greatest common factor of 6x plus 2. And if we look at the numbers here, 6 and 2, they have a factor in common, which is 2. So we bring out a 2 to the front, open up our parentheses, and then we ask ourselves, 2 times what is 6x? Well, that'd be 2 times 3x. Then we ask ourselves 2 times what is 2? That's just 1, so we can write down a plus 1. And we're done factoring the right side of our expression, and we can close our bracket. That's what factoring by grouping is. Notice that we grouped our terms together, 2 on the left, 2 on the right, and then we factored each of those individually. Now we're not done yet, but we are almost there. One thing that's super important, with factoring by grouping, you know you did it right only if you get the same factor twice. Look at this, we have a 3x plus 1 over here, and a 3x plus 1 over here. They are exactly the same. So what we do is we pull those to the front. Okay, remember we had a 2 outside, and now we're bringing out that 3x plus 1, which is the common factor. Open up your next set of parentheses, and in that set of parentheses, we write what's left. So notice, from the first term, once you take out that 3x plus 1, you're left with an x. Write it down. From the second term, once you pull out the 3x plus 1, you're left with the 2. And it's positive. Make sure to bring down the sign. We write down a plus 2. And this is our final answer, which is step 7, write in factored form. Remember, if you want to check your work here, you do so by foiling. So we'll practice that just one more time. 2 on the outside times 3x plus 1 times x plus 2. And here I'll show you a different way which you can work out a problem like this. What you can do is multiply the 2 into one of the parentheses first. Very important here, however, that you only multiply the 2 into one of the parentheses, not both. If you do it to both, in essence, you are multiplying by 4 or multiplying by 2 twice. Okay, so if we multiply 2 times 3x, we get 6x. 2 times 1, we get a positive 2. Put it in parentheses, and we still need to multiply by that x plus 2 that we haven't touched yet. Now we can FOIL, so 6x times x, that's 6x squared. 6x times 2, that's a plus 12x. 2 times x, that's a positive 2x. And 2 times 2, that's a positive 4. We look for like terms here, and we have them in the middle. Remember, you can identify like terms by looking at the variable. The variables have to be the same, and the variables have to have the same exponent. In this case, we have the same variable, which is x, and both of the x's have the same exponent, which is 1. We can combine 12 and 2 and get 14, so plus 14x in the middle. Bring down the 6x squared, bring down the 4. We want to compare this to our original question. Let's check. 6x squared plus 14x plus 4. Way up here, we did have a 6x squared plus 14x plus 4. So we know we factored correctly. Here we have number 4. 2x squared plus 11x plus 15. First thing we'll do is check to see if we can pull out a greatest common factor. We're comparing the numbers 2, 11, and 15. Notice that 11 is prime. Prime means the only factors of the number are 1 and itself. And if you think about it, the only factors of 11 are 1 and 11, right? 11 is only divisible by 1. So 11 is prime, and that lets you know that there are no common factors between 2, 11, and 15. That's why if we look at our step-by-step, it says factor out the greatest common factor if possible, because sometimes it's not possible. So we'll use the AC method to factor this expression as it is. And remember, we use the AC method when our A, the leading coefficient, is not equal to 1, which it isn't in this case because we see that it is equal to 2. Our first thing to do here is to multiply A times C. So A times C, that's 2 times 15, which is 30. Next, what we do is list the factors of 30. And we want to list the factors in order. That would be 1 times 30. Then 2 times 15, that's 30. 3 also goes into 30, that's 3 times 10. We check the number 4, 4 does not go into 30. And then we check the number 5. 30 is divisible by 5, that would be 5 times 6. The next number we check is 6, however 6 is already on the list, so we know we got all the factors down. Now we want to look for the pair in our list that can add up to 11. And if you look through the pair of numbers yourself and you add them in your head and subtract them in your head, you'll see that the factors we're interested are 5 and 6. Again, our goal here is our B, and it's a positive 11 if we look at our original expression. So we think to ourselves, what signs can we give to 5 and 6 so that when we combine them, we'll get 11? In this case, both numbers should be positive because 5 plus 6 is 11. And these are the factors that we'll use when we go on to the next step. Right now, we're on step 5. Which is when we rewrite the trinomial into having 4 terms instead of 3. Okay, so we'll bring down the 2x squared, we'll bring down the plus 15 at the end, and in the middle, instead of writing plus 11x, we'll write down 11 by using our factors that we just found. So again, we'll put a positive 5x, and we'll also put a positive 6x. Important to check your work at this step before you go any further, just to verify that when you combine the like terms in your expression, you do get the number that you want. In this case, 5x plus 6x gives us 11x, which matches our original question exactly, so we're on the right track. Now we're on step 6, which is to factor by grouping. So remember, you split up your terms right in the middle, you draw a little line, and then you want to factor the left side and you want to factor the right side. Starting with the left side, if we look at the expression 2x squared and 5x, think about the numbers 2 and 5. Their greatest common factor is 1. Now let's look at the x's. We have 2x's over here and 1x over here, so both terms have only 1x in common, and that's our greatest common factor. We'll write the x down in the front, and then we ask ourselves, x times what is 2x squared? That would be 2x. Now x times what is 5x? That would be a positive 5. And we close our parentheses because we're done factoring the left side. Moving on to the right side, we want to pull out the greatest common factor of 6x and 15. If we compare the numbers, 6 and 15 have a greatest common factor of 3. Also notice the signs, both are positive, so we can pull out a positive 3. Now we open up our parentheses and we ask ourselves, 3 times what is 6x? That would be 2x. Then we ask ourselves, 3 times what is 15? That would be a positive 5. And we're done factoring the right half. Here's where you check if you factored by grouping correctly, and the way you can tell if you did is that your parentheses will match. They need to be exactly the same, including the sign. We'll bring those out to the front, so we'll write down 2x plus 5 and open up our next set of parentheses, and here we write down what's left. So notice, from the first term, if we pull out the 2x plus 5, we're left with an x, so we write that down. And from the second term, if we pull out the 2x plus 5, we're left with a positive 3. Remember to bring down the sign, so we write down plus 3. And this is our final answer in factored form. Here we have number 5, 6x squared plus x minus 12. First, we want to see if we can pull out a greatest common factor from 6, 1, notice there's an invisible 1 here, and negative 12. These three numbers don't have any factors in common besides 1, so we can get right into our AC method. Remember, the first step is to multiply a times c. In this case, that would be 6 times negative 12, which gives us negative 72. Next thing is to create a list of its factors, and remember, we don't need to consider the sign when you're listing the factors of a times c. So the factors of 72, let's start checking. We can multiply 1 times 72. Also 2 goes into 72, that's 2 times 36. 3 goes into 72, that's 3 times 24. 4 goes into 72, that's 4 times 18. 5 does not go into 72, then we check 6. 6 times 12 gives you 72. Then we check 7. 7 does not go into 72, then we check 8. 8 times 9 is 72. We check the number 10. 10 does not go into 72. We check the number 11. 11 does not go in. And then we check the number 12, but wait a minute, 12 is already in our list, so we know we're done. Notice that as your numbers get larger, your list gets longer. Now we're looking for the pair of numbers that when we add them or subtract them, we'll get our middle term. In this case, our middle term is that invisible 1. So the goal is a 1. Looking through our list of factors, remember you want to add them and subtract them and see if you can get 1 in either case. And if we look at the bottom here, the last pair of factors, 8 and 9, we see that when we subtract 9 minus 8, we get a positive 1, which is what we want. These are the two numbers that we'll use when we rewrite our trinomial into having 4 terms. So we have 6x squared. We'll also bring down that negative 12 at the very end. And instead of writing that plus x in the middle, we'll use our factors 9 and negative 8. So we'll write down a plus 9x minus 8x. And that leaves us with our original question rewritten with 4 terms. Remember to check here. You want to check that these terms in the middle really do give you that plus x that we want. And if you combine them, you'll see that we do indeed get a plus x, right? Because 9x minus 8x gives you 1x. And remember, we do not write the 1. Next thing to do is to split your terms right in the middle and then find the greatest common factor of each side individually. Starting with the left side, we want to figure out what is the greatest common factor of 6x squared and 9x. If you look at the numbers 6 and 9, they have a greatest common factor of 3, so we can pull out a 3. If you look at the x's, this one has 2 x's, this one has 1 x, so both of them have 1 x in common. And we can write down an x to accompany our 3 that's already on the outside, open up the parentheses, and we ask ourselves, 6x squared divided by 3x is 2x. 9x divided by 3x is a positive 3. And we can close our parentheses there to show that we're done factoring the left side. Moving on to the right side, we have a negative 8x and a negative 12. We're looking for their greatest common factor. And you might think that since they're both even, 8 and 12 are both even, the greatest common factor is 2. So say you wrote down a 2 and you opened up your parentheses. Then you ask yourselves, negative 8x divided by positive 2 gives you what? And you would say negative 4x. Then you would ask yourself, negative 12 divided by 2 is what? And the answer there is a negative 6. and you can close your parentheses, and we're done factoring the right side. Now when we check if we did our factoring by grouping correctly, we'll see that our parentheses do not match. And that means that we did something wrong. So let's check our work. If we look inside of this parentheses, 2 and 3, their greatest common factor is 1. So we know we factored completely on that side. If we look inside of these parentheses, -4 and -6, those numbers are both even, meaning that they still have a greatest common factor. The greatest common factor of 4 and 6 is 2, meaning that we did not factor this side completely. So let's keep going, and to fix our mistake, what we will do is pull out this 2 that we didn't pull out earlier. So we'll bring down the 3x, parentheses 2x plus 3 from above. Now for the rest of the expression, notice we already had a 2 on the outside. We can bring it down, but we're also factoring out a 2 from the inside of the parentheses. So we'll write that next to the 2 that we already had and open up our parentheses. Now 2 times what is -4x? Well, that's just a -2x. And then we ask ourselves, 2 times what is -6? And that would just be a -3. We can write it down and close our parentheses. We can also combine these numbers out here in the front. 2 times 2 is actually 4. And let me show you where that 4 is coming from. If we go way back here to when we were thinking about the greatest common factor of 8 and 12, the greatest common factor of 8 and 12 is actually not 2. They have another factor in common, which is 4. So the greatest common factor of 8 and 12 is actually 4. And if we missed it the first time, when we check our work, we see that we can still correct our answer, and there's that 4 that we missed initially. We know we did our factoring by grouping correctly if our parentheses match. And in this case, they still do not match, but they're almost identical except for the signs. Notice we have a 2x here and a 2x here, a 3 here and a 3 here. What's different here are the signs, and notice that they're exactly opposite. We have a +2 here and a -2 here. We have a +3 here and a -3 here. So when your signs are exactly opposite, that's a super easy mistake to fix. And I'll show you how. We can rewrite our expression as 3x times 2x plus 3. And before you write down that +4, remember we're about to pull out a negative from the inside of our parentheses. So instead of a +4, it'll be a -4. And open up the parentheses. We'll change every sign that was inside. Instead of a -2x, we'll write down a 2x. Instead of a -3, we'll write down a +3. Close the parentheses. And now let's check if we did it correctly. We look inside our parentheses to see if we have an exact match, and this time we do. So we know we factored by grouping correctly. We bring out the common factor to the front, so we'll write down 2x plus 3 and open up your parentheses. When you take out the 2x plus 3 from the first term, we're left with the 3x, so that's what you write down. And looking at our second term, when you pull out the 2x plus 3 from it, you're left with a -4. Make sure to bring down the sign and close your parentheses. This would be our final answer. And let's check it just to be safe. So we have 2x times 3x, that's a 6x squared. Then we have 2x times -4, that's -8x. Next we have a 3 times 3x, that's a plus 9x. And finally a 3 times a -4, that's -12. We look for our like terms, there they are in the middle. -8x plus 9x, we combine them and we get a +1. So we write down 6x squared plus 1x, that 1 will be invisible, minus 12. If we compare this to our original, we have an exact match. 6x squared plus x minus 12 is perfect. And that lets us know that we factored correctly. And there you have it. That's our lesson on using the AC method to factor quadratic trinomials. Stay blessed!